Hi, everyone. Welcome back and happy April. Today, I'm reviewing the 7 books that I read in the month of March. I had a relatively low reading month. I would say seven's kind of on the lower ish end of what I typically read in a month, but I had some hits and misses here that I'm really excited to share with you. I also have a new microphone. Hopefully, the quality is significantly improved. Let me know if you have any other feedback down in the comments below. This is my first time ever filming a reading recap since starting this channel. So we're going to see how things go here today. I'm totally open to feedback on format, things you'd like me to talk about as I review them, etc. So let me know in the comments. And I'm just going to go in order of when I read them throughout the month. So first to last in terms of when I finished them. And maybe in the future, I'll group them by genre or something like that. But this is just what works best for my brain. So let's go ahead and get straight into it. The first book I read in the month of March was I finished up the first book in the Percy Jackson and the Olympian series, The Lightning Thief by Rick Riordan. If you've been following along on my channel, you know I am kind of using this as a good middle grade palette cleanser series this year. I never read Percy Jackson. I've never seen the movies or any adaptations. So it's a totally fresh story and plotline for me, which is really, really fun to experience for the first time because I kind of missed out on this when I was the quote right age for it. That being said, I will be totally honest, I was a bit disappointed in this one. I'll tell you why in a second, but first, a quick synopsis if you, like me, haven't ever read Percy Jackson. We follow, unsurprisingly, Percy Jackson, who finds out very early on in this first book that he is a demigod. The majority of this first book is set up for the world, and we find out that the Olympians are ruling over humans to an extent from their positioning in the clouds above the sky, above New York City. Regular humans don't know this. It's just the demigod community amongst the humans, amongst the mortals that know that that's happening. And through a series of events early on in the book, Percy ends up at a summer camp for these half-bloods, these demigods. He is then, as a very young child, sent on a quest to try to prevent a war between the gods that would hugely affect the human population. It follows a pretty typical, first book in a series, in a fantasy series structure with a good, quest structure attached to that as well. Now, getting into a bit of why I was slightly disappointed, this is very, very middle grade, which I 100% expected. I knew that going in. I'm not going to hold that against the book. But Rick Riordan's sort of snarky writing style, I think, really amped it up and played into that younger audience vibe more than some of the other middle grade that I've read as an adult. And it just made it that much harder, I think, to read and get myself in the mindset of our characters because very clearly I'm not middle grade age. But I don't always have a hard time connecting to younger characters in books. This one, just something about the sense of humor, the tone of that humor and snark combined with the age of the characters made this one harder for me to connect to. I did love it for nostalgia reasons. Like I said, very classic quest structure, which is always fun to read. And getting into another world and imagining how I would have read this as a younger kid was also super fun. And then one thing I did appreciate about this first book, and I really hope I'm interpreting this correctly, and we're not looking at another J.K. Rowling debacle where an author writing a middle grade or YA series is actually just terrible. But I think I'm interpreting this correctly. Someone please tell me if not, and I need to do a deep dive on Rick Riordan as a person, but I'm pretty sure I'm on the right path here. So oftentimes the author would be poking fun at either a character with a disability or a girl, a female character in general, by using common tropes and characteristics. But then immediately that's contradicted by the actions of that person. So sort of it's an expectations that are like couched in like misogyny, for example, but then our female character will kind of like overcome that and actually be different than people maybe would have expected. This to me felt like a really good like middle grade introduction to not assuming things about people based on appearances. But again, if I'm misinterpreting and Rick Riordan is in fact actually just prejudiced against folks with disabilities or women, please tell me. And I'll do some looking into it as well. Just noticed when I was reflecting back on what I did love about the book, that quest structure, and then the introduction of the idea that we should not assume things about people based on who they are or what they look like, was uh, a positive that came out of this to me, especially at the age range. I think he did it well. That being said, still was not honestly my favorite. I will finish the whole series because I think I'm hopeful that things will kind of progress as the reader ages. I'm hoping the plot will get more complex as that happens. I did, when I was talking about this with a friend who really loves the series, she was like, yeah, you know what? As an adult, I would actually almost recommend that people just watch the movies because the writing style really is so middle grade that it's kind of difficult to slog through. I really loved it in theory, and I think that I will continue to like it in theory and in structure, if not in writing style. So I'm going to keep going with it, and we will see how things go as it progresses. Next up, I have Our Infinite Fates by Laura Stephen. I actually have a physical copy of this one, pretty rare for me. I'm not going to hold it up the whole time I'm reading or talking about it. So I'll put a picture up here like I normally do. This one, I really loved so much about it, but it ended up falling just short of 5 stars for me, and I'll talk here about why. First, a little synopsis. We've got Aiden and Evelyn as our 2 main characters, and they have lived multiple lifetimes where in each of them, as they approach their 18th birthday, they kill each other, and then they are reincarnated again later as new people, new lives, new timelines, and that cycle continues to repeat and repeat and repeat for the past 1,000 years. This book is formatted by spending a substantial amount of the book in one location in like modern day 2022 in Wales during that version of their lifetimes, interspersed with flashbacks in chapters to previous lifetimes, going sequentially backward in time. So, we've got modern day, current day Wales, and then the earliest flashback in the book is the most recent lifetime before that, and then on down throughout the 1,000 years, going backward into history. I thought it was a really interesting way for the author to structure the book because we learn about their history and their love for each other kind of in like reverse chronological order. And it kind of like builds the foundation of the relationship in reverse, almost like an opposite order of a romance novel where you're oftentimes, not always, but usually progressing from like when they meet up through the like ending culmination of their relationship. We're almost working like in reverse in this book. Now, I have a ton of notes on what I liked and what I didn't love so much about this book. So I am going to be reading off my notes a little bit here just because I don't want to miss anything. I was surprised by how like nuanced my thoughts and feelings were about this book, especially I think I went into it with like relatively low expectations. I know a few people in my life and I've watched some reviews online that were not glowing reviews. So I was A, surprised by how much I enjoyed it, and B, surprised by how much I had thoughts wise about why I did or didn't love it. So I'm going to start out with the things that I loved. The first chapter absolutely shocked me. It hooked me in immediately. I could not believe how quickly I liked both of our characters. They had emotions, they seemed like real people, and that started like right from the first chapter for me, and I appreciated that. I really enjoyed seeing the portrayals of different time periods and different geographical locations over time throughout their 1,000 years. I think that Laura Stephen did a great job in general of kind of like setting the tone and the vibe of each of those locations throughout the book, which was very fun to read about. I especially loved the discussions throughout the book of the impact on our two main characters of having lived multiple lives, gotten close with, loved multiple people, multiple different families, and then having to leave those people again and again and again, and how devastating the impact of that is on them as characters and how the two of them cope with that really differently. I did buy into the love story between our two main characters. I know that like the reverse chronological order might not work for everybody, but I was totally bought in and totally believed in their like relationship and their love for each other, despite the fact that they keep killing each other. And I also really appreciated the commentary throughout the book around the fact that the two of them were meant for each other and kept coming back to each other and loving each other, no matter what their circumstances, no matter what their social standing, no matter how each of them presented in each of their lifetimes, because they reincarnated both as men and women throughout their different lifetimes. And I appreciated the commentary on not just physical traits or social standing or other external factors being the things that are drawing them to each other, but it's really like the essence of who they are at a soul level of why they feel connected. The things I did not love so much, ironically, the modern day timeline that we spend like probably half the book in was one of my least favorite timelines. I kept wishing that I would get more than a chapter at a time of those previous lives, and I just didn't feel as connected to the versions of our characters in the modern day timeline, which kind of bummed me out. Also, just by the end, by nature of kind of the structure of this book, the theming was super, super repetitive. By the time we reached like the midway point of the book, I was like, okay, I feel like we've basically said what we have to say here. And now it feels like the rest of the book is essentially just there because we need to get back 1,000 years in time because of the way it was structured. There wasn't enough new information revealed throughout the book to make me want to keep kind of reading. They kind of just kept retreading the same themes over and over. So what I mean by this is in like the first 2 chapters or whatever, we learn that they're in this cycle of growing up, killing each other, being reincarnated, finding each other again, growing up, killing each other, etc., right? We learn that like very early on. Then we learn basically nothing else about that dynamic for the whole middle of the book. And then it's not till the 3rd to last chapter that Aiden reveals some information that he knows about their situation that then changes the plot trajectory in like the last couple of chapters. So even though the geographical location and the time periods were changing, and those were really interesting changes to read about, the overall plot trajectory of each of those timelines was nearly identical with no real clues or next steps until the very end. So it just dragged on for me a bit. So all in all, I did really like this book, but there was no way that with those hesitations throughout the whole like middle of the book that I could have put this at a 5-star, but I did really enjoy it. Whew, deep breath. That was like a very long recap. Book number 3 that I read this month was That's a Great Question, I'd Love to Tell You by Elise Myers. Wait a minute, I have this one too. Where did that go? You know what? It's on my shelf behind me. First of all, this is a beautiful hardcover book. I don't know how I'm going to show you that while I'm holding this microphone, but the inside of this is like embossed and it's really cute. It's so, so cute. And a bunch of the interior pages have wonderful hand-drawn pictures. I'll find a couple examples of that as well because Elise drew those herself for the book. So I actually started this book back in February, but I finished it in March and I loved every second of it. I am biased. I love Elise Myers. She's a content creator. She's a writer. She's a comedian. And I really think she's hilarious and can really relate to a lot of what she talks about. So I was predisposed to really love this book. And no surprise, I loved it. This is a memoir by Elise detailing how her previous romantic and friendly relationships led her to find the love of her life and her now husband, Jonas. There's some other stuff in there too, but largely that's kind of like the arc, the overarching narrative that we're getting here from Elise in this memoir. The chapters are formatted really differently depending on what part of the story she's telling. A lot of times the writing and like the actual words on the page are structured in a way that mirrors what they're saying. So if it's saying like falling, 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 like the words look like a waterfall, like cascading down the page, for example. Again, lots of hand-drawn little illustrations by Elise herself, which is a fun addition. I really loved how she formatted this. It felt like a really natural extension of the work I've already seen and loved from her. So that was very, very fun to see that in like a published physical format instead of just digitally online. Phenomenal representations of neurodiversity and womanhood in this book, and I really, really appreciated that. Elise just has such a knack for bringing memories to life in a way that feels so like tangible. I cringed so many times and laughed so many times while reading this because it just feels so much like I'm there with the person, like with her and with the people she's around. And she's just got a really, really phenomenal way of doing that. So I love this book. Very, very cathartic read, a very personal read, and I would highly recommend it. All right, the next book I read this month was Iron Gold by Pierce Brown. This is an amazing continuation of the Red Rising series. So this is book 4 in the overall series, but it's the first book in the second arc. So books 1 through 3 are kind of a standalone trilogy, and then books 4 through 7 are a second set of books that are happening 10 years later. So this is book 4, the fourth book overall, but the first book in the second arc. Just a quick synopsis of the first book, because I don't want to spoil anything. We're following Darrow. He's a red, which is a classification of people in this hierarchical system that exists far into the future of humanity. We are living in space. Darrow and his fellow reds are held as slaves in the mines on Mars. And they're told that when they are done mining and the planet has been terraformed, that they will be the first to have the honor to live on Mars and kind of get pick of the crop land, etc., for their service to making it a livable planet. Well, Darrow finds out super early on, I'm not spoiling the book, that it's all a lie and that people are already living on Mars and that the Reds are the lowest on the totem pole. So he joins forces with a resistance rebel group who is trying to take down the hierarchical system and the golds who are at the top of that pyramid. And Darrow does this by becoming a red himself and infiltrating the system, basically. Now, like I said, the first 3 books happen kind of in sequential order chronologically. And now book 4 is picking up 10 years after that resistance, that rising has occurred. This book is a pretty big departure from the first series in a couple of ways. First things first, we're following multiple POVs, which was not the case in the first trilogy. We were just following Darrow there. And Darrow is still one of the POVs, of course, but we're following, I believe it's 4. Yeah, I think it's 4 POVs in the book. And I'll be honest that I'm not sure I totally loved it. I understand why it was important. This second set of books, based on my understanding so far, is really looking into the repercussions of war and the challenges that arise even when you have a more politically equitable government, how that may not actually fix the reality for most people in the society. So I understand why the multi-POV is an important component of telling that story and really bringing that narrative to life. I just didn't feel nearly as connected, honestly, to those other POVs as I did to Darrow, even by the end. I didn't feel the emotional impact quite as hard as I did in the first trilogy. That being said, I did give this 5 stars. I still think that the world building, the political commentary, the overall arcs that Pierce Brown writes are just so unbelievably above a lot of what else I read that I couldn't not give this 5 stars. Also, I'm really biased. I'll just be honest. The first trilogy of the Red Rising series is one of my favorite trilogies of all time, or series or books of all time. And so if I'm honest, maybe it should have been a 4, but it just didn't seem fair to do that when I also rated like our Infinite Fates a 4. And I had like major problems with the entire plot structure of that book, right? I just didn't think it was fair to bump it down into that category when really it should live in that 5 star tier for me. So I'm really excited to get into Dark Age, the next book, and see where this goes and see if I feel more connected to the multi POV perspectives with more time with those characters. So we'll see. I'll report back. I loved it. Just to be clear, loved it. Phenomenal book. His commentary is so sharp, so cutting, and really, really thoughtful. And this book is no exception. I did love it. I felt a bit of a disconnect. Okay, book 5 is The Strength of the Few by James Islington, another continuation of a sci-fi series I love. This is the second book in the Hierarchy series. The first book is called The Will of the Many, if that rings a bell for you. The Will of the Many was one of my top books of 2025, so I was super, super excited to read this second book and to continue in that world, especially because that first book does end on quite the reveal and cliffhanger. It was one of the most resounding 5 stars I've ever given a book, no notes. So I was so, so pumped to get into The Strength of the Few. Let me give you a quick synopsis of The Will of the Many. Again, I don't want to spoil this second book, so I'm not going to do a synopsis there. But in The Will of the Many, we follow Viz. He's an orphan who has never participated in the hierarchical system of the world in which he lives. The structure of this hierarchy works by having the people lowest on the pyramidal structure cede their will, which is sort of like this internal drive that they have. They cede part of that will to the people above them, and then the people above them cede to the people above them, and so on and so forth up the pyramid in a perfect pyramid scheme. The people who have more will than they would naturally have just as an individual have like exceptional strength. They have like different abilities that they otherwise wouldn't have. It's almost like it gives them magical powers. Kind of. So in our first book in this series, Viz is sought out by a man relatively high up on that hierarchy who adopts him in exchange for sending Viz to an academy on an island that prepares the wealthy children of this hierarchy to be ready to become senators and to serve the political entity that is the hierarchy when they graduate. It teaches them how to use wealth properly and the political machinations of their country. So Viz's adoptive father, though, has ulterior motives. He really wants Viz to go to this island not to position their family better in the hierarchy, but he wants him to go so that he can investigate some fishy business that happened 7 years ago on this island where the academy exists. So Viz does that. And then this second book is kind of post academy setting. Interestingly enough, like I just talked about in the Red Rising series, this second book also has a split POV. It's a slightly different approach to multi POV than the Red Rising series, but I did think that this one was an effective use of multi POV while still retaining the same tone throughout all the POVs that kept a consistent through line in this plot. I have heard opinions from some folks in my life and online saying that they think the POVs get a bit confusing and that they jump between the POVs too quickly. I didn't feel that. I really enjoyed it. I liked having the different POVs. I felt like it was a natural progression from the plot of the first book. And I liked the variability and the sort of abrupt changes between points of view. This is a bit of a classic second book where we're going from kind of in the first book, there's one scale and scope of like who's the bad guy. And now in the second book, we realize that the scale and scope is much broader and bigger than we knew in the first book. So that's kind of a classic fantasy and sci-fi structure, and that's definitely the case here. And because of that, this second book did have a substantial amount of kind of new world building that we had to adjust to and learn about. And I personally love that. Like, I enjoy the world building, and I especially love how James Islington does his world building. I think he does a really great job of balancing plot and world building in the same sequence. Like at the same time, it's not just like here's an info dump about the world and there's no plot happening, and now here's all the plot that's happening with no world building, right? I think he does a good job of having those two things interplay and using the world building to drive the plot forward, or using the plot to introduce new pieces of the world that you need to know. I only have one real like comment for this book that is more on the negative side, or I guess just didn't totally live up to my expectations. And that is that I feel like Viz goes back a bit on some of his own moral code throughout this book. And those moral code components were things that were like really deeply ingrained pieces of him as a person and a character in book one. Now, to be clear, I don't think that having a reversal or a change of heart in terms of your values and your morals as a character is a problem. I actually love that. I think character growth is a huge part of what I love in a lot of books. But I feel that they were a bit glossed over, a bit kind of like tossed to the side, like a bit like, oh, yeah, well, whatever. That thing that I used to think for the whole first 19 years of my life, meh, whatever. Um, it just felt a little bit like we brushed over them and didn't actually, like, I feel like James Islington didn't actually use them as an opportunity to super clearly say, like, wow, look at our character growing and developing as he learns more about the world he lives in, the challenges he's facing, the people that he loves. I just feel like it was a bit of a missed opportunity. And it happened many times. Like, it happened, I can think of 4 right off the top of my head where I was like, wow, that's a big change in point of view and opinion of our character. I wish we would have sat with that for a bit longer or given him a little bit more time to think it through or contemplate what it would mean for him as a person to kind of go back on those things that he felt so strongly about in the past. Aside from that, though, I love this book. Absolutely loved it. Gave it a 5 stars. I love it. Can't wait for the next 2 books in this series. And especially because we did so much of the world building in this second book, I'm really hoping that that carries forward into a strong, plot-driven 3rd and 4th book for this series. Number 6 on the list, we've got Delphi by Claire Pollard. I listened to part of this as an audiobook, that I've been saying this word wrong my whole life. So I've been saying Delphi. It's Delphi, apparently. So good to know. Good to know. Good info to have. I went into this one basically completely blind. I chose it on my TBR. As you can see, I got it from a library book sale. And I then chose it with my TBR jar, and I basically chose to go in totally blind. And I'm glad that I did that, but it was also a bit of a gut punch that I wasn't expecting because of that. We are following an unnamed main character. She's a woman in her 40s who teaches like the theory and the history of prophecy throughout our history as humans. And she works at a university in London when COVID hits. And this book is structured in a really unique way. I really, really loved it. It's structured where each chapter is titled like a type of prophecying that folks have done in the past, like that humans have explored and tried throughout history. And then our main character is kind of examining her life through the lens of that type of prophecy. So let me try to find a quick example here. Okay, so like this chapter is called Hematomancy, Prophecy by Blood. So then our chapter goes on to kind of talk about hematomancy as a practice in human history, but also alongside it, she's kind of thinking about her own internal thoughts, things that are happening with her family, things that are happening politically in terms of hematomancy. So there's a quote. There's a quote from Donald Trump in the book where he suggests that we could potentially inject our blood with bleach in order to try to eradicate COVID, right? So she talks about the fallacy of that line of thinking and like, oh my goodness, I can't believe this man who's leading one of the most powerful nations in the world is trying to like taint our blood in a way. She also talks about her kid who has multiple underlying conditions. So she's very worried about him getting a nosebleed all over his pajamas in the middle of the night and the kind of panic spiral that sends her down because she sees it as a sign kind of foretelling bad things to come for their family during COVID, right? So it's a really interesting dynamic, and each chapter kind of goes along like that. Sometimes it's more or less in chronological, like sequential order, but also there are some flashbacks and things like that fit the narrative structure really well. This was a super interesting commentary on how COVID altered our closest relationships, renegotiated our ideas around what is acceptable risk to take, and called into question projects that span government, tech, and healthcare involvement. Because it happens inside the mind of our protagonist, we get a lot of like very unsettling, raw, unfiltered thoughts. She has a pretty dark internal monologue. And it was simultaneously like very cathartic for me to read and very, very cringy for me to read. I did enjoy this a lot. I would, however, suggest looking up trigger warnings if you are a parent, especially, or if you're still kind of coming to terms with some of the fallout from COVID and the impacts of that. I would look up trigger warnings. It's pretty intense. It's a pretty intense book, despite the fact that it's only like 200 pages. I liked it though. I did like it. I'd recommend it to certain people. And then last but not least on this list, we've got book number 7. This is Follow Me to Ground by Sue Rainsford. Again, one that I didn't really know much about from a library book sale, and also chose it with my TBR jar this past month. In this one, we follow Ada, and she is a kind of like semi-non-human who has healing powers, and she works alongside her father, who is also like a semi-non-human. They age very, very slowly, and then they can perform cures that involve like putting people to sleep just with their own like minds, then cutting them open, digging around in their bodies with their bare hands, sewing them back up, and then burying them in this very specific plot of land out back behind their house that has, that's like a kind of a conscious patch of dirt. And then they dig them up after they are healed and ready to be sent back to their families. Super interesting premise there. And our main character, Ada, falls in love, or I would actually probably call it lust or like even infatuation with a human, Samson. And then she is kind of left trying to figure out, does she continue on curing with her father? Does she leave with Samson? Does she try to find some sort of middle ground? What does she do? What does she do about this dilemma she finds herself in, basically? This one is super gory, really, really descriptive internal organ language. And it's also gory in other ways, in like obsessive thoughts and familial abuse. And it's pretty gritty and rough to get through. So coincidentally, I read Delphi and this one like back to back, and they were both kind of like a peep inside a pretty unhinged woman's mind during a really challenging time. And kind of seeing how they're trying to like come to terms with that and cope with that. I would maybe go into this one with looking at trigger warnings, but also maybe not quite so much. Like if you're okay with gore, I think you'll be okay with like the vast majority of the themes presented in this book. But I would just go in expecting like a pretty nasty time. I did enjoy it. I am still thinking about it very, very vividly days later. I don't know what rating I'll ultimately end up giving it. Right now it's sitting at a 3, just because I kind of feel like, ooh, I don't know, this one might be one that sticks with me for like a super, super, super long time. But I kind of flew through it and didn't take the time to digest it while I was reading. So I think I just need to sit with it a bit more before I know how I ultimately feel about it. Woo! Okay, so turns out I'm super chatty in these book reviews and recaps. But just really quickly here, I'm going to give you the list of other things that I'm currently in the middle of and other books that I'll read the rest of this spring, just so you have an idea of where I'm headed from here in terms of my spring reading list. So books that I'm in the middle of that will certainly be on my April are The Glutton by A.K. Blakemore, Atmosphere by Taylor Jenkins Reid, Beloved by Toni Morrison, and Cantica by Elizabeth Graver. Those are the ones that I'm currently reading, like actively in the middle of. And then other books that I'm going to read the rest of spring, these will either be done in April or May, are The Poet Empress by Shen Tao, The Sea of Monsters, so the second book in Percy Jackson and the Olympians by Rick Riordan, Circe by Madeline Miller, How to Talk So Little Kids Will Listen by Joanna Faber and Julie King, and last but not least, Bury Our Bones in the Midnight Soil by V.E. Schwab. So just to give you a little preview there of what's coming next on my channel, that's what I've got lined up and what I'm currently reading. So follow along, subscribe if you enjoyed some of my thoughts on these books, and I would love to see you again, especially at the end of April and May, so I can give you my thoughts on those books I just told you are on my current spring reading list. Thank you so much for being here and listening to me ramble this whole way through. I really appreciate you, and I will see you next time.